Okay. All right, it's 6:01. Hello, good evening. Welcome everyone to tonight's public workshop on the Larkspur Climate Action Plan update, Climate Action Plan 2040. I'm going to just wait a couple minutes or a little bit anyway to let people come in. We've got a few attendees and there are a few more coming in. So let me just wait a little bit and make sure everyone can join us.
All right, it looks like folks may filter in throughout the meeting as their schedule permits, but it looks like the first wave of attendees, everyone's made it into the Zoom webinar, if we'd like to start.
Okay, let me do one thing here. Sorry, my notes just got hidden here. Hold on. There we go. Sorry, I lost my notes for a minute there behind the screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. I'm Neil Toft. I'm the Planning and Building Director for the City of Larkspur. Thank you for attending and thanks for coming online with us. Again, these are challenging times and we're all trying to make the best of it. And I appreciate your attending on this Zoom webinar. First thing I'd like to do is thank a number of people who've been helpful in putting this climate action plan together, and starting with a number of the member agencies and staff from the Marine Climate and Energy Partnership, and Christine O'Rourke, who assists the partnership in its mission. There's been a lot of collaboration with staff and other agencies and many of the committees and groups that help serve them. And a lot of the data that we've generated, a lot of the best practices come through a lot of that sharing and collaboration through MCEP. I also want to extend some thanks to Anna Camarada and Nick Armour. They were two planners for the City of Larkspur who were our sustainability coordinators with MCEP, so our representatives, and they worked on generating data for the GHG inventories and helped build the climate action plan, working with Christine. So they were integral participants in helping put this plan together. So the City of Larkspur first adopted its climate action plan in 2010. And at that time, we had a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target of 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. We've met that goal and then some. And the city has been conducting regular inventories over the last several years with MCEP and with the support of Christine. And we're now endeavoring to update the climate action plan for the next 10 years to address GHG reduction targets of no less than 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So we've been working with Christine since 2018 and have prepared the draft climate action plan. We had presented this draft initially to the City Council back in March. And we're now moving this forward with a public workshop to solicit your comments, your questions, your thoughts, and any sage advice on this very significant and important topic. So a couple of housekeeping tips. Christine, if you want to go to the next slide. Let's see.
Not sure why it's not advancing.
Let's see if we can get it moving.
Yeah, sorry. Let me stop the share and start again. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so just a couple housekeeping items. The meeting is being recorded, and we will have it available on our website. So for yourselves or others who may want to go back and view, we will be having it available on the website. And we'll be starting with a presentation by Christine, and then we'll have a Q&A session after that, where we'll be happy to take in questions and comments. And at that time, if you want to speak, please click the raise hand icon and we'll call on you. Or you can type a question into the chat box. Shannon, the assistant city manager, is assisting us tonight, and she's helping work behind the curtain, running the meeting, and we'll be checking those questions and throwing them out to us as well. If we don't get to all the questions, we will be extending the comment period out to April 14th, to May 14th. Our intent is to take in any comments or suggestions and create a response, whether it's edits to the plan or other responses, and bring that back to the City Council in mid-June. And you can send your responses to me. We'll have my email up later in the presentation, but you can certainly email me at ntoft@cityoflarkspur.org anytime, and if you have any other questions on this matter. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christine, and she can do the presentation, and we'll have a couple little surveys for the group as well.
Yes, that's right. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine O'Rourke, and it's really a pleasure to be here tonight with you and to review the Climate Action Plan. As Neil said, we've got a presentation and we have a few poll questions also, so that should help to keep things interesting and keep everyone engaged as we do this virtually. So the Climate Action Plan, the draft plan that we presented to the City Council, and that's up on the city's website, is an update to the 2010 Climate Action Plan. And as Neil said, that plan was designed to meet a 2020 target, which was 15% below 2005 emission levels, or equivalent to 1990 levels. And the city did meet that, actually met that target 4 years early. So in 2016, the state adopted new legislation, Senate Bill 32, which sets a new long-term target for the year 2030. And that sets a target to reduce emissions, statewide emissions, 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So that is the goal that most jurisdictions are using, kind of as a minimum goal, to at least reach the statewide goal and reduce emissions 40% by 2030. So this Climate Action Plan is utilizing a template that was first developed for the City of San Rafael's Climate Change Action Plan, their update, which was done about a year and a half ago. And we've also utilized that template for the City of San Anselmo's Climate Action Plan, which was also adopted that year. And then the County of Marin's CAP, which was just adopted late last fall. So it's also being used in Fairfax right now. The reason to use a template is that it really is much more cost effective. And it also ensures that we're going to have consistent strategies and programs across all the climate action plans. So the cities and towns can all work together to implement the climate action plans. This one of our objectives for all climate action plans is to really focus on strategies that are going to be most impactful to reduce emissions. And when we're looking at potential greenhouse gas reductions from the emissions, we're basing that on achievable performance targets. We're using substantial evidence, and we're and just really, sound projections to back up our emissions reductions estimates. So the chart here is showing you emission sources for the city of Larkspur in 2018. And what's really interesting is that it shows you kind of the sectors that we really need to focus on if we're going to meet our goal of reducing emissions another 40%. So most of the emissions, almost half of the emissions in Larkspur, are coming from passenger cars. And you can see just 9% are commercial vehicles and buses. So getting at that passenger car, the VMT, and reducing those emissions is really critical to the success of this plan. The other large sector here is natural gas, and that's almost a third of emissions are coming from natural gas. What's interesting, you'll see like electricity is only at 8%, and that slice of this chart used to be much larger. But over the past 15 years, our electricity has gotten so much cleaner that it's now representing a much smaller slice of the pie. And so there's not a lot more emissions to kind of get out of that sector. So we really need to be focusing primarily on passenger cars and natural gas, also waste, although only 5%. Those emissions come from methane, which is a very potent and short-lived greenhouse gas. So that's something else that you'll see that we are focusing on. So this is a look at the trend in Larkspur's community-wide emissions. We've been doing emissions inventory since 2005, and as Neil says, we produce those annually at MCEP for all of the cities and towns in Marin. And so the target there is shown in that red dotted line, and it also shows that Larkspur did exceed that target or pass that target back in 2016. So in 2018, which is the last year that we have the data to produce an inventory, emissions were 23% below 2005 levels. And that's equivalent to about 9% below 1990 levels. I know there's an awful lot of numbers, but if you just think that our target here is 40%, and we're already at 9%, so we have another 31% to go. I'll also mention that we're now currently working on the 2019 inventories, and so we should have those up in about another month or two. So this chart is showing you first the blue line, which is the actual emissions, which is what I just showed you. It's just formatted in a different way. And then you're looking at that orange line, which is the business as usual forecast. And that is forecasting what emissions will be going out to 2050 if we don't do anything. And we just are looking at what the projections are for population growth, for employment growth, and for vehicle miles traveled in the transportation sector. So we have pretty good forecasts going out to 2040. And then beyond, and you can see the emissions are kind of slowly growing until 2040. And then beyond that, it gets a little murkier. But we do have a Department of Finance forecast for countywide population, which actually is showing the countywide population will decrease between 2040 and 2050. That's the one that I used for this chart here. And that's why you see kind of the emissions bending down between 2040 and 2050. The next line here is the green line, the dotted line, which is the state goals. And it shows where the emissions, how much Larkspur will need to reduce emissions in order to meet those statewide goals. So the first one is 2030. And as I said, that's been enshrined in legislation in Senate Bill 32 to reduce emissions 40% below 1990 levels. And then the next target out is for 2050. That's actually an executive order. It has not been legislated, but it presumably will be at some point in the future. And that is to reduce emissions 80% below 1990 levels. You may have also heard that the state, the governor has issued an executive order that says we're going to have zero net emissions by 2045. So that would be accomplished through both mitigating or reducing emissions and also sequestering carbon dioxide in primarily natural and working lands. So that's another target. That target is typically more appropriate for, at least on a local government level, for a jurisdiction that has a lot of working lands, like the county, for example, has integrated that target into their climate action plan, because so much of the county land is in agriculture, and there's great opportunities to sequester emissions on farmland and on range lands. But for a city like Larkspur that doesn't really have much agricultural land, sequestration is pretty much limited to planting more trees, to kind of restoring riparian habitat, just increasing the vegetative cover, but it's not, it can't happen at the extent where it would happen in a place like the county of Marin. So what I'm going to do here in this presentation is just go through the sections of the plan. I'm just going to highlight some major trends, some state legislation that is impacting the sectors, and talk very briefly, very high level, about some of the measures, the programs that are in the climate action plan. If you've had a chance to review the plan, to read the plan, the draft that's online, you'll know that there are quite a few more programs that I'm not going to be able to get to in this presentation, but be happy to talk about them or answer your questions about those as well in the Q&A period. So in transportation, the first measure, which is a kind of a large measure in the plan, is about electric vehicles. And as you saw, we've got almost half of the emissions are coming from passenger cars. So we see that converting that passenger fleet, all the cars that are using gasoline, to electric vehicles is really going to, is a very important factor in our climate action plan. The state also is putting a lot of effort behind EVs. They have a goal to have 5 million EVs on the road by 2030. That would translate to about 13% of all registered vehicles across the county, across the state, excuse me. You also may have heard the governor issued an executive order that says that to require all new passenger vehicles sold in California to be zero emission by 2035. And then medium and heavy duty trucks by 2045. So 2035 is 5 years after the end of our plan. We're looking forward to 2030, but presumably that would be phased in over time. So that will also have some impact, certainly even now, to kind of spur the manufacturers, the car manufacturers, to be providing us with more options for electric vehicles. So Marin County, however, we're actually making much more progress than the rest of the state in adopting electric vehicles. We have the second highest EV rate in the state. We're only second behind Santa Clara County. And here in Marin, about 4% of automobiles that are registered here are zero emission vehicles. ZEVs include all battery electric vehicles that run just entirely on the battery, as well as plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And those vehicles usually go about 25, 30 miles on a battery, and then we'll switch over to the gasoline engine. Most trips in Marin are less than 30 miles. So we find that most of those cars actually do drive on their battery, as long as they get charged. So the climate action plan that we've drafted is targeting a minimum, at least 33% of passenger vehicles in Larkspur to be zero emission by 2030. We've kind of arrived at that number by looking at what the current level of EVs are, what the growth rate is. We're looking at replacement schedules. Passenger vehicles last on average about 12 years right now. So it takes a while to turn over the entire on-road fleet of passenger vehicles, but we can get to 33% if we just grow the EV market by about 20% a year. We would get there. So there's a number of actions in the plan. Couple of the really important ones are to require workplace and multi-family EV chargers and EV ready parking spaces. We know workplace charging is important because well, we want people to charge during the day when our electricity is really clean, when we have all that solar energy on the grid. So to have workplace charging is important. And also multifamily. Can be a little difficult, especially with existing multifamily, but there are opportunities through a REACH code to require new multifamily buildings to have both EV outlets available, ready, so that a tenant can just take their charger and plug it right into a 240-volt outlet. And also some EV chargers as well, just for the communal chargers for everyone to use. There's also another action is to install more public EV chargers and fast chargers. These we really need to be strategic about where we place them. We want a lot of fast chargers need to be located where there are amenities like shopping and restaurants, or at least good Wi-Fi, so people can get online while they're charging their car. And also we want these to be on major corridors, so people who are doing long trips will be able to do a fast charge and top off their tank, so to speak. Also installing wayfinding signage. This is important for not only EV owners to find their way to the charging station, but also for people who are thinking about EVs, just haven't bought one yet, to know that there's plenty of EV charging stations out there, and that EV ownership is becoming a norm in the county. So this brings us to our first pop quiz, our poll question. And the question here is, the CAP is targeting at least 33% of passenger vehicles registered in Marin to be zero emission by 2030. Do you think this is achievable? So you've got three options: yes, no, or not sure. And I'm going to ask Shannon to launch the poll. And we'll just leave it open until we have enough people have had a chance to register their choice. So there is the poll. So it looks like we have 12 attendees. So I'm going to see if we can get all 12 to register their choice. Got 9. Anybody else? Don't want to close the poll before you're ready. All right. Got 10 people. I think that's probably all we'll get. Let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results, please. Okay, there you have it. Yes, 60%. One person said no, and 3 people said not sure. 30% not sure, which is completely understandable. But I'm really excited to see that there's a lot of enthusiasm for that 33% target. Okay, let's, Shannon, if you could close that poll, and we will go on to the next slide in the presentation.
Is the poll showing as closed, or is it still up on your screen?
I still see it up on my screen. Let me see if I can just close it. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay. All right. So there are other programs in the Climate Action Plan around transportation. It's not all EVs all the time. There are programs to increase biking and walking by building out the bicycle and pedestrian network, providing more facilities. These are all programs and facilities that are identified in the city's bicycle and pedestrian master plan. So it really is about implementing that plan. Also a program to continue to support safe routes to school programs. We know that there's still plenty of opportunities to get children out of those single occupant vehicles or being driven to school, and to take alternative or active forms of transportation. Also another program to encourage employers to provide transportation demand management programs. This is alternative transportation, or even working from home. Another program to work with Marin Transit and Golden Gate Transit to expand ridership, to make transit more easier and accessible to use, also to electrify their fleet. There is a state law that requires all of the transit agencies to begin purchasing electric buses and phasing them in. So eventually we'll be 100% electric fleet. Another program to encourage SMART to use renewable diesel, Also, and as well, the city to use renewable diesel in its fleet, and it's all of its trucks that use diesel. Renewable diesel is about 50% less in greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a good transition fuel while we're waiting for more electric models to become available. And then to electrify the city fleet, and also small off-road equipment. That's landscaping equipment, like lots of good options out there for leaf blowers, for chainsaws, or lawnmowers, etc. In fact, most homeowners at this point are actually purchasing electric landscape equipment. So we're already kind of transforming that marketplace. Okay, the next section is on renewable energy and electrification. As I mentioned earlier, our electricity is clean and getting cleaner. MCE expects to be 100% greenhouse gas free by 2022. PG&E actually last year in 2019, I should say, was virtually 100% greenhouse gas free, and that was really quite surprising. I think we'll see what happens when the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant is taken offline, and see what happens to their those sources where all their emissions are, where the sources where their electricity is coming from. But for now, almost 100% free. There's also a state law that requires 60% of electricity to come from renewable sources by 2030, and to be greenhouse gas free by 2045. So another thing is about solar. Solar is still growing, and here in Larkspur, solar PV, so photovoltaics. This is solar that is usually found on a rooftop. So that kind of solar is supplying about 5% of the local electricity needs in 2018. So we're projecting that the solar PV market will continue to grow in Larkspur and will double by 2030, and be at supplying about 10% of local electricity needs. There's also utility solar, of course, which MCE and PG&E uses to green their electricity. And so this is in addition to that type of utility solar. So there's our programs in the Climate Action Plan to support and facilitate solar installation, as well as battery storage. Batteries are really important, especially in emergencies and public safety power shutoff events. We don't want people to be using natural gas or gasoline generators. So we're encouraging battery use for those generators, especially when they're tied to solar installations. And then the other kind of part to this is electrification. So, as I showed you earlier, the natural gas is responsible for about 1/3 of emissions. So here we have a real opportunity to swap out appliances and heating systems that use natural gas to ones that use electricity. And so this chart is just showing you the difference in how much reduction can happen by switching to a high efficiency appliance. So if you look at a cooktop, for example, one of the high efficiency induction cooktops uses only about 71 kilowatt hours an entire year, which would generate 9 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions using the emission rates that we have for 2018. So its natural gas counterpart is using 28 therms of natural gas a year, which is 328 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see if you swap out that natural gas cooktop for one that uses electricity, you can reduce your emissions 97%. And that's true all the way down the line. So two of the important new programs that are in the CAP are to get at this electrification issue. So one program is for the city to adopt a new ordinance that will require all new residential buildings to be all electric beginning in 2023. And that coincides with the next 3-year building code cycle. So every 3 years, the state issues a new building code. It will come out next year in 2022. And all the cities have to adopt it and implement it starting in January of 2023. So it's a great opportunity for the cities to adopt a REACH code at the same time that has additional requirements. Sometimes they're just energy efficiency requirements, but this would be requiring all residential buildings to be all electric. And then with the next code cycle in 2026 to require non-residential buildings to be all electric. Now the state is kind of moving in this way. It's probably not going to happen with the next code cycle. So this would be a REACH code, and Larkspur would be a leader in this, along with the County of Marin, for example, has adopted this program in their recent climate action plan update. Another ordinance is to be adopted in 2024, and that would require efficient electric appliances to be installed whenever an appliance that uses natural gas is being replaced. So, so this is, it says they're as feasible. I mean, at this point, it can be very expensive to swap out a natural gas heating system with a heat pump, a high efficiency electric heat pump system. So sometimes it's not feasible. It could be a really high cost burden, but in a few years, we're hoping that technology improves, prices come down, and that it is much more feasible to swap out that a heating system. The others can be a little easier to swap out at this point. So this brings us to our next poll question. Should the city require new residential and non-residential buildings to be all electric? So you have three options here: yes, no, or not sure. And Shannon, could you launch this poll for us, please? Okay, we've got 8 people voting. Is anybody else? 9? Anybody else want to join in? Give you a couple of more seconds to record your choice. All right, I think we're done here. So there are our results. Yes, 89% people said yes, and 1 said not sure. All right. So I'm going to close that. And I think we have another poll question. Yes, we do. And this is about that second ordinance I was just talking about. Should the city require installation of high efficiency electric appliances when replacing appliances that use natural gas? So here we have 4 choices. There's yes, yes, except for cooktops, no, and not sure. And might sound funny, the yes, except for cooktops, but we know from a lot of studies that have been done that cooktops are kind of the one thing people love to cook with natural gas. Although I'm told that I don't have an induction stove, but I'm told that they work really well. So that's one of the things that we find that people, it's a little hard for people to give up their natural gas stoves. So that's why that option's there too. But a few more seconds here to record your choice. And all right, I think we're done. Let's share those results, please. So yes, 67%. And yes, except for cooktops, 33%. I think the GE and the rest of them have to do a little better on their marketing to get people to switch to induction, but we'll see. Okay, so let's end this poll and back to the presentation. And we're moving on to energy efficiency now. So the city, as well as throughout the county, we've done pretty well with our energy efficiency efforts. We have actually been reducing energy use about 1% per year. So the programs in the CAP are around continuing that track record, continuing to work with PG&E and MCE to promote available programs, rebates, energy audits. Also, there's different kinds of financing alternatives. So we're expecting that if we continue along that track, we will be able to reduce energy use another 1% per year. A new program is to consider requiring an energy efficiency audit at time of sale of a residence or commercial building. It wouldn't require actually an upgrade at the time, but it can make people really aware of different projects that they could take on, what the return on investment would be, and also just to be aware of, like, maybe, the insulation really is inadequate, there are duct leaks, issues that can be fixed, and that would really help to make the house more energy efficient. There's another program to use high albedo surfaces for roadways and parking lots. These are generally materials that are light in color, so they reflect the sunlight back. And that helps to reduce the ambient temperatures, which in turn reduces the need for cooling, electricity that cools buildings. Another program to upgrade all of the city's streetlights to LEDs. I know that the city is already in the process of doing that. And a program for the city to complete energy efficiency projects in its buildings and facilities, and also to implement energy conservation practices. So here's another poll question, and I'm pretty sure this is the last one of the evening. So the question here is, should the city require an energy audit at time of sale or major remodel? And so your options are yes, for both time of sale and major remodels. Yes, but only at time of sale. Yes, but only at time of major remodel. No, and not sure. So Shannon, could you launch this poll for us, please? So go ahead and record your choice. Almost got everybody. One more person? Wanna join in? Okay, I think we're done. And here we go. Yes, for both time of sale and major remodels. Very interesting. 70%. Yes, but only for major remodels is 20%. And one person is not sure. Great. All right. Thank you. Let's close that. And we will finish up the presentation now. The next section is on waste reduction. And here the state is being much more aggressive with legislation to reduce waste, and particularly organic waste, because organic waste, when it goes into the landfill, it breaks down, it creates methane, which is a very potent, powerful greenhouse gas. So there's state laws to divert 75% of organic material and recover 20% of edible food from the landfill by 2025. There's also another law that requires all businesses to have organic waste recycling services. Doesn't require them to actually use it, but it does require them to have the service. And then in the building code, there's a requirement for 65% of construction and demolition waste to be diverted from the landfill. So the programs here are for the city to essentially to implement Senate Bill 32, to work with the city's waste hauler and increase the recycling and composting rates. Also food being donated to our food recovery programs here in the county, and to meet those SB 1383 targets and mandates. There's an requirement to, which is an SB 1383 requirement to adopt an ordinance that requires use of recycling and organic waste collection services. And then finally, kind of as a last resort and program, to consider investing in new solid waste processing infrastructure. And that would remove recoverable materials. So failing, training all customers to remove their organic materials, this would actually do it for them. It would be expensive, but it would do it for them. The section on water conservation is actually, there's not a lot of emissions that are going to be reduced in this section. And that's because our water agencies, Marin Municipal Water District, as well as the Sonoma County Water Agency, where MMWD purchases about 20% of their water, both of those water agencies are using 100% greenhouse gas-free electricity in their operations. So that's why emissions have actually fallen 97% since 2005 in this sector. And water consumption is also down. It's down about 2% per year. It's been falling. So this section in the CAP has programs, and we're assuming that we can continue to reduce water consumption 1% per year. It's really important to do that. Of course, we're in another drought year, and as climate change continues to warm up the climate, we're going to have probably more frequent and prolonged droughts. So I don't want to take up too much more time to go over the other CAP sections, not that they're not important, but very briefly, there are programs about carbon sequestration. So this, like, as I said earlier, is locking up that carbon in our natural environment by planting more trees and restoring vegetation. Another section on climate change adaptation. It's pretty short, and that's really because it's pointing to other plans. There's a call for the city to adopt a comprehensive climate change adaptation plan, and that would address sea level rise as well as other impacts from climate change, including the increased risk in wildfire, as well as prolonged heat events. And also to be sure that other plans like the local hazard mitigation plan and the city's general plan and the safety element within that general plan are addressing climate change and adaptation in particular. There's another section on community engagement, and this is actually really important because the city's city's only responsible for about 1% of the citywide emissions. So it's really up to the community to reduce their emissions. And the way we're going to do that, there's, of course, through some regulation, but a lot of it is through engaging the community, doing public outreach, educating the community on ways that they can reduce emission, and inspiring them, motivating them to do so. One way that we do that is through a program called Resilient Neighborhoods. At MCEP, we've been partnering with Resilient Neighborhoods for several years now. And it's a great program. They organize climate action teams. They put different households together and they educate them on what their greenhouse gas emissions, their carbon footprint looks like, and on ways that they can reduce that footprint, and they hook them up with all kinds of rebates and just inspire people to do something. So it's actually a great program. So that is just an example of one way that the city can continue to engage the community to do its part. And then there's finally a section on implementation and monitoring the climate action plan. So of course, we don't want this cap to sit on the shelf. We want the city to implement it. And so the city will commit to both kind of reviewing the climate action plan annually, setting new priorities each year, and tracking progress. Also, and continuing to do greenhouse gas emissions inventories, which is another very important way to track our progress. And then finally, of course, to update this climate action plan. Probably in somewhere between 5 and 10 years, it will need to be updated when we have new targets that we're going for. And we also have just new technology and new best practices that we want to integrate into an updated climate action plan. So kind of to wrap up here, our climate action plan, if it's fully implemented, we are anticipating that it will reduce emissions 40% below 1990 levels. That's kind of at a minimum. It's just a floor. And so this is consistent with statewide legislation, Senate Bill 32, also the guidance that the California Air Resources Board gives all of the local governments on how they can do their part to reduce emissions. Again, this reflects minimum goals for city actions and for programs. Of course, the community can go far above and do more by using more EVs, using alternative transportation, electrifying their homes, just in general, making more sustainable lifestyle choices. So that is the end of the presentation. So now we're going to do our question and answer period. Again, the draft cap is posted on the city's website, and the city will be accepting public comments through May 14th. And we're planning on bringing this draft cap back to the council in June. So we'll be probably making some changes based on the input that we get from the community. I see we've already have 2 people raising their hand and 6 questions in the Q&A. So I don't have to go through how to do that. Obviously, everybody already knows. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Neil is going to join me in answering questions. I think, did we decide who is going to look at the questions? I got them right here.
Yeah, so. I can go ahead and we can start with, we'll maybe answer the first 2 that are typed, because I think that other folks, of course, might have these questions too. And then keep your hands raised, folks who raise your hands, and we'll speak and we'll work our way through that and then continue. But I'll just start reading things out and kind of MC this portion if that's all right with everybody.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Shannon.
All right, so the first question we have was typed, and the question is, how will you target renewables and electricity for multifamily housing folks or people without access to a smart meter?
So, so essentially, we're targeting renewable energy through solar installations on those multifamily homes, developments. That's going to have to be done if it's an apartment building, of course, by the apartment owner. There are different programs that MCE has, for example, to try to incentivize those larger buildings that have a lot of rooftop area, and that can contribute to providing more clean electricity on the grid. If it's not possible to, because you're in an apartment building or in a multifamily building, and you can't get your other, condo owners to want to do a solar energy, you can always do Deep Green or another program, and PG&E has 100% renewable electricity choices as well. So for an average household, it's only going to cost a few dollars, like $5 more a month, and you can get 100% renewable energy that way. I mean, obviously, and if you're putting on the lights in the middle of the night, you're not getting solar energy, but it is a way to kind of green the entire electricity grid. And it's also a very easy and cost-effective way to do that. You can jump on the MCE website. All you need is your PG&E account number, and they can very quickly switch you over to Deep Green. So I would encourage everybody to do that, especially if you're living in an apartment and solar is just really not an option for you.
All right. Next question is, what are plans to work with nonprofit affordable housing providers in terms of decarbonization and feasibility?
So I don't think there are any specific programs to working with affordable housing providers. We're really talking about all developers. So if there was an ordinance that was adopted to require electricity or to require electrification or all electric buildings, that would apply to affordable housing developers as well.
All right, and then I am going to call on Ken Jones. I'm gonna do the enable to talk. So, and Ken has a question. So whenever you're ready, Ken, you should be unmuted.
Thank you. Yeah, in light of the, it looks like the goals that are set are based on the state goals of SB 32 and in 2017 goals that may be a little outdated at this point. And there was a recent article published by, I think Daniel Kamen was the primary author, but there were 8 others, saying that California is way behind on not only other states, but also other countries, and is going to need to update their goals for 2030, and even as much as decreasing emissions by 7% a year until then. And in light of that, and the fact that we're in Marin and we might be able to do more because we don't have so much industry here, is there any thought to setting a stronger goal?
Well, as I said in the presentation, the goal that's in the plan really is a minimum goal. So, of course, the city would welcome reducing emissions even more. I think a lot of it really depends on what's going to happen at the state level as well as at the federal level. I'm really encouraged that we have a new administration that's very committed to reducing greenhouse gases and putting us on the right trajectory. So I think as more programs come from the federal and state level, we'll be able to hopefully exceed that goal, the 30%, the 40% goal. But it was, the climate action plan really was designed to meet the minimum requirements or to meet the statewide goal, I should say. Neil, did you have any other comment you want to make about that?
Yeah, well, and I think it's intended as meeting the statewide goal and looking a bit aspirationally beyond that, certainly. And I think we're all learning new facts about climate change and about the technologies and measures that can be implemented to do it, to reduce it more readily. And I think what we'll be doing is looking at some of the ideas brought out and some of the comments and see what we can practically apply within the climate action plan. I think it's kind of a tension between, we do want to be very aspirational for this, but we also want to be practical in the plan. It is what can the city do or promote within its own policies and regulations and funding, and then what can we encourage in terms of our public engagement. As Christine was saying, there's a lot to be done really in the community and by the community. And what can we practically or defensively promote as a goal that is achievable, given, looking at the reduction numbers by categories. So the exercise has really been one of, by the specific categories. Christine's really, we've looked at what targets are not just feasible, but both practical, feasible, and achievable, and also, what can we do beyond that? So I think that'll, be something we'll discuss more with the city council, is if we do set higher goals, what are our expectations of what the city can do to really achieve those goals, as opposed to, as Christine was saying, the arena around us being the state and federal government and those entities.
All right, Ken, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mute you again. And then the next question we have is from Robin with a raised hand. So I'm going to enable the allow to talk feature and just go ahead and ask your question. You should be unmuted.
All right, thanks. Actually, this is David Waller calling rather than Robin.
Oh, my apologies. My apologies. It was
no. You're fine, Shannon. It always just shows up as Robin. We have a shared account, but her name is on it. So sorry about that. To the last question that came in and some of the comments on it, I'd like to just add an idea on that, and then I have a separate question. The idea is, I think we're all aware of the tension between the state goals, the federal goals, what's achievable and so on. But I'm wondering if the CAP could have an explicit statement that anticipates that the state and federal goals are likely over the expected 10-year life of this CAP to ratchet up. And that whether or not they do, there may well be opportunities where Larkspur can take actions to exceed them. And I think rather than having that be kind of an implied thing, an explicit statement of anticipating that these goals will ratchet up and Larkspur's intent to try and track with those as they do might be a very helpful, or a good approach to addressing that. What my actually, and I have one other background. I'm sorry, this isn't quite a question yet. I'm assuming that comments that were made at the March 17th presentation to the council, either verbally or in writing, are already in and don't need to be restated. Is that?
Yes, absolutely.
Just wanted to, because we had some pretty key comments in there.
Yeah, and just for anyone else, sorry, David, for anyone else in the audience, on our webpage, we have posted those comments. So those are available to the public on our webpage, and we'll be folding those in with all these additional, any discussion items and comments as we bring this back for the city council.
Great. Okay. So the kind of question that I have, kind of the challenge question here, is it goes back to this issue of community engagement. As Christine has pointed out, the CAP really is relying almost entirely on the actions of community members as opposed to government departments and so on to achieve this next round of goals. And I want to commend both of you for having this workshop, but I would point out that out of Larkspur's, 11,000 population, there's purportedly 12 people or so on the call. So it's not a very big percentage of the population. So the question that I have is really, what more can Larkspur do to make the CAP not only a living document, not something that's done every 10 years and that it's periodically tracked how we're doing against it, but a document that becomes a guidance document for members of the community, that when they think about climate change and what can I do, that they naturally go to the CAP, that it's part of their awareness. And even during this time of trying to draft the CAP and update it, how to engage more, a bigger slice of the community. I mean, I know among my neighbors and friends, almost all of them are concerned about climate change. And a lot of them feel pretty powerless to do anything about it. And so that key question, what can I do? And yet that's exactly what this CAP is relying on, is those people doing stuff. And they're sitting here saying, what can I do? It's just one person. So somehow that is a big hurdle of how to transition the CAP from a guidance document into a toolkit document that people actually look to when they say, how could I improve, my greenhouse gas emissions around my house? That they can go, we know that there's a section in there that addresses that, and it gives specific what you can do, but how to get people to link to that. So I don't have an answer. I don't have a good idea, but one thing I do wonder about is if maybe there could be some looking at communities that have been particularly successful in getting that community engagement. What actions have they taken to achieve that? So like I say, I don't know what the answer is, but we're all relying on, individual residents, embracing these ideas, making them the way they live their lives. So I'm just wondering, Christine, if you have any thoughts on that, or, is there more that can be done to look at communities that have been particularly successful?
Well, I think you make some really great points. So the city of San Rafael actually took their climate action plan and put it online in a really interesting and engaging way. And if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to do it. That's something that Larkspur could consider doing as well. It just, it has a lot of points people to other resources and has kind of engaging little stories about, San Rafael residents and businesses and what they've been doing, because that helps people to identify with, in their own lives. So that's one thing that the city could do. I think continuing partnership with nonprofits like Resilient Neighborhoods, we really do kind of rely on them to do a lot of the outreach, because cities don't have staff to do that kind of outreach. And then of course the city can also just use its vehicles, like a city newsletter. I'm not sure what Larkspur's is called, but most city newsletters reach a substantial number of the population. And I just know this from doing workshops, that they really can inspire people, motivate people to take action, to attend workshops, or to go to other kind of events, or to, just to hook them up with rebates and programs. So I would, using Nextdoor, using social media, and then, for the city to kind of advertise what it's doing, also to be a leader. So one of the things is, like, if the city has an electric vehicle, to put a decal on it saying that it's an electric vehicle and it's being driven with 100% greenhouse gas free. It's a completely 100% greenhouse gas free vehicle. So there's things like that the city can do as well, to just be a leader.
Great. And then just
and I think, Christine, like on that point is, for instance, we're in the process of it hasn't been adopted yet, but with the next CIP, the city will be proposing to use some of the federal funding to swap out all of the streetlights. And hopefully in doing that, I mean, there's going to be a transition. I think people will notice it, but you also have to kind of promote that as well. And Shannon, who's helping with us tonight, is a communications. She's the city's sort of lead on communications. And we do know today communications has changed greatly. There's all sorts of, between Facebook posts and Nextdoor and website outreach. It's becoming, there's a whole new medium out there to really be able to reach people. And, agencies, local agencies are adjusting and learning and getting better and better at it. And I think that's certainly something the CAP encourages, and maybe it can be, we can look at how it, maybe focuses more on, as you say, getting people, what we can do to get people engaged and interested. And it's, one other thing is people do tend to, it's hard for the everyday person necessarily go in and read through a large 84-page document. You kind of need to, people learn in bites. They learn in messaging. So it's really an art to doing that as well, because I think we all know that is what's going to change, is make a difference, is everybody sort of pitching in, as individuals more than just one big program. So anyway.
Yes, for anyone who's interested, about quarterly, we do a communications update to the city council. So we have lots of great questions coming specifically about climate, so I won't talk too in depth, but we do have like an e-newsletter that reaches around 1,000 folks. We put in energy rebates, electric car information, both in our general communications as well as reaching some more targeted audiences, like folks who are on our library list, who don't necessarily follow city council meetings all the time, et cetera, to try to reach more folks. In the past year, we've been more aggressive with spending modest amounts of money, but doing some actual campaigning and spending on Instagram and reaching, again, audiences in Larkspur that may or may not follow a climate action plan or something, with just informational stuff. So just for a little more context, I'm going to go ahead, and there's a few questions in a row that are really great questions that deal with the CAP and equity concerns. So I'm going to start with the broadest one, and then we'll, depending on what's answered or not, I'll read out the next couple to you, Christine and Neil, to address these questions, since they're certainly interconnected. So the first one is, what are the equity implications for an energy audit replacement at the time of sale or a major remodel? To go in a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the proposal is to require an energy audit, but not to actually require upgrades at that time. So that's how the program is worded. So yeah, so the audit itself can, would add a few $100s to the price of all of the other things that you do when you purchase a new home. So yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I do think there's, as we look closer into issues of equity, there may be points where we look at some of the code requirements and identify where there may be exemptions for low income residents and so on. I think a lot of times these are done in, certainly a lot of the construction codes are done typically relative to home ownership projects, but we do have situations of home ownership where it is lower income, or there can be equity issues. We also we keep a number of properties that are below market rate, and those occasionally need upgrades and repairs, and the Marin Housing Authority has low interest loan opportunities for those types of projects, and they can also qualify for grants to some degree. But it's a good question. We'll need to look into that more carefully.
Yeah, I would also, you just reminded me too, Neil, that there is for electrification program, the County of Marin has an Electrify Marin program, which provides rebates for people who want to swap out a natural gas appliance with an electric version. And they have deeper subsidies for low income folks. So that's just another way of kind of getting at that equity piece, is to provide greater rebates for for income qualified people. And I believe MCE is doing, they have an income qualified program as well, I think around electric vehicles. So there are, I think the equity issue is something that, all, if not, most, if not all programs are using at this point to make sure that it is equitable.
All right, and I'm just going to read, this question's been partially answered, but if there's anything, Christine or Neil, you'd like to add. Another question we have that's written is, what sustainable funding programs can the city or county offer for very low income tenants to shift off gas to reduce the energy burden? So a little bit more targeted. I know we spoke, you spoke to this generally in the previous question, but if there's anything we'd like to add, or maybe resources for folks specifically for gas to electric.
Yeah, I know of that Electrify Marin program. I know that there's also, different, the CARES rate, I believe it's called, for low income people. So if you're switching from natural gas to electricity, you would actually benefit from a lower electricity rate as well. So that could be another incentive to make that swap. Okay,
great. And then there's another question that's climate is an intersectional issue. How does the CAP acknowledge and work with this in mind? So this is specifically talking about intersectionality, not just low income and rebates, et cetera, but also looking at, other priorities and issues of, justice and other concerns, and how that's adopted into the climate action plan. And if the person who wrote this would also like to raise a hand or something for further clarification, by all means, feel free to do so.
I would say that, we try to write the programs through that equity lens. So, we are looking at, there's different needs for low-income communities for electric vehicles, for example. Most low-income households are not going to be buying a new electric car. They're going to be buying a used electric car, hopefully. So providing rebates for used cars as well is important. Also being sure that we're locating electric vehicle chargers or fast chargers in low-income communities or in multifamily communities, so that the charging is available to those households as well. So those are a couple of things that I know are in the climate action plan.
All right, and then I'm gonna also call on folks. So we have Ken Strong, you have your hand raised. I'm gonna go ahead and enable you to allow you to talk, and please ask your question when you're ready.
Sure, thank you very much. First of all, I would echo David's comments about the community outreach. And I know there's a lot about there in the back about community engagement. And I would just encourage you to make sure that that reaches out to local contractors, because I think that they are resistant to some of these new electrical appliances in particular. They don't understand them. And so reaching out and explaining the health impacts so that they understand the health impacts of switching to electric, as well as have a better understanding of the programs along the lines of what Christine mentioned, that in terms of rebates, so they can sell those to their customers in an intelligent manner. I think that would be important. And then I just had a couple of comments, and I don't know whether this is more appropriate on the for the future ordinances you're talking about, or on the specific language. But in the zero emissions vehicle LCT C1F, you talk about installing a minimum number of electric vehicle chargers in, for example, multifamily. And I would encourage that in these, if you're going to require installation, they need to be able to at least run an electric outlet for a level 1 charger to every parking space. Having some level 2 chargers would help, but most multifamily dwellings, you've got a fixed parking spot. And so enabling that there, and there's software out there that will allow them to, the landlord to monitor that and charge it. Mm-hmm. And then another thing on the RE C3 building and appliance electrification, I really don't like the where feasible language in there. I know that there's some that hopefully when you get around to drafting an ordinance on this, if you do, There's going to be something that's tighter than that so that your average homeowner can't just say, well, it's not feasible because I don't want to look into it or whatever. And there's some hard deadlines on that. And I would also encourage those electric appliances have smart controls so that they can be enabled for demand response or DER when that's available. So those are just a couple of comments.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand and mute you again. I have a couple of folks who are in the chat asking if they can just add some thoughts, or just, if you need to ask a specific question, etc. during this. And there are a couple of questions that the answers are informational that I'm going to have us address before we get to some more general feedback. We're definitely going to take general feedback, is my understanding, but we'll move over, and there's a couple of specific targeted questions for Christine and Neil. So one question here is, tidal marshes are very good sequesterers of carbon when they are healthy. What goals does the CAP have that will proactively study, manage, or monitor marshes so they will continue to sequester at a high rate?
I don't have the climate action plan in front of me right now. I know there is something about, well, I'll have to look at it. I know that we're talking about vegetation, riparian habitat, and whether it's calling out, specifically marshes. I can look at that, and we can add that to the program.
We may need to, and I am looking at it, and there's a lot of discussion on urban forest, and then certainly encouraging managed parks and open spaces. I think we can look at that. Increase extent and carbon sequestration potential of bay wetlands through improvements such as horizontal levees. That's kind of a strong program, as opposed to necessarily maintaining the health of the marshes. There is discussion about climate change and sea level rise adaptation, because I think anyone who's familiar with the concerns about sea level rise is that it's going to be rising faster than the marshes can necessarily adapt to. And so there's a concern about part of sea level rise strategies will involve how to protect and mitigate impacts to marsh areas in order to keep them healthy and to avoid erosion. So there's probably some deeper concepts. We'll take a look at that, but that's a good point.
Good comment. Thank you.
Just for the benefit, this is a recorded webinar that folks can certainly look at later, and folks who weren't able to attend can view. Can you just add maybe a brief statement or some clarification about, particularly in the Corte Madera Creek or in creek areas, there are certain things that are in the city's jurisdiction and other things that are actually under the sphere of other agencies that would require collaboration, or it wouldn't even be a program that we would spearhead. Could you just speak briefly to that? Because that's something that certainly, when I started getting involved in local government, et cetera, is not intuitive.
Yeah, the Larkspur, Corte Madera has quite a bit of marsh area, where Larkspur has a little bit less. We don't have as much bay frontage. And we do have marsh around the Piper Park, and of course some along the Corte Madera Creek areas, pockets of marsh. But a lot of that is regulated through whether or not it's owned privately or through state or other school districts or other agencies or part of the flood control district. There's a variety of agencies that exercise permitting authority, such as the Regional Water Quality Board, Army Corps of Engineers, State Fish and Wildlife, as well as the state lands and the Marin County Flood Control District. So there's a whole raft of regulations that are really out there to protect marshlands. In our general plan update, we're going to be redesignating some areas to rezone what are currently identified as residential zoning districts to open space for marsh protection. So I think everything's really going in the direction of marsh protection, and probably some of the greatest threat is from sea level rise itself.
And I did find there's in program SAC2, letter D, increase the extent and carbon sequestration potential of bay wetlands through improvements such as horizontal levees. So I think we could probably kind of fine tune that language in that one to address the health of marshes.
All right, there's another water question, different sort of question that was in the chat. To save more water, should Marin County and municipalities be required to use non-potable or recycled water for all irrigation?
So I think, I don't know about Larkspur in particular, but I believe most cities are using recycled water whenever it's practical. So, usually it's for large landscapes like parks or large commercial sites as well. And it does require new infrastructure in order to deliver that recycled water. So it's not a simple fix. So generally they try to target where that water is going to where it's going to go, so that the infrastructure that is built is not it's more cost effectively delivered to those larger recycled water users. That's my understanding of it, but I'm by no means an expert in that.
All right. I'm going to call on Lisa. I'm going to enable the allow to talk feature. So you can please ask your question or have any comments whenever you're ready. You should be.
Great. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for putting this on for the residents of Larkspur. I would just like to plug the Resilient Neighborhoods group. As a recent graduate, we did a Zoom session with about 15 individuals from all over Marin, but most notably about 5 households here in Larkspur. And just as noted on the Resilient Neighborhoods website, a total of 50 households in Larkspur as of December 31st, 2020 have completed the program with a savings of over 500,000 pounds of carbon, which is great. The program is super easy. It's free. It meet about 5 times. And during these times, we're meeting via Zoom. They provide you with a checklist, and so you can check off what you've already done. And most of the items are pretty simple. Committing to not buying water and plastic bottles is just a simple one. Reducing your plastic consumption, reusable bags, stuff that you might already do. And even if you think you've already done or do a lot, you might discover new earth-friendly strategies. I'm reading directly from their website on that. So yeah, I definitely recommend the program. You can find out on resilientneighborhoods.org. I think Larkspur has sent out the information on how to join a group. Also on Nextdoor, there's the occasional notice, and I highly support it. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. The next person I have is Walt Vernon. I'm going to go ahead and enable the allow to talk function. So whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you. And hello again, Christine.
Hi, Walt.
So I'm Walt. I'm actually not a Larkspur resident, so hopefully that's okay. But I chair the Climate Action Committee for the town of Fairfax. And I just wanted to thank you guys for the work you're doing and just share a couple thoughts about engagement from our experience that I hope will be helpful. And maybe the first thing I should say is none of us none of us will be successful in this effort unless all of us are successful in this effort. And so I offer you, outside of this meeting, if you guys ever want to call and talk or collaborate or whatever, we're certainly here and would be delighted to share anything that we've got with you. And so for whatever that's worth. In Fairfax, our town created an all-volunteer climate action committee. So we have no staff. We do have two members of our town council on the climate action committee, but we have a team of really passionate volunteers. And it sort of goes, I think it was David earlier who was talking about these people who want to get engaged and do something. And it's given us a chance to bring some of those people together and to use some of that energy. We actually, our volunteers, I don't know if this was good or bad for Christine, but our volunteers were the people who helped build our climate action plan. We actually have and manage our own website. It's connected to the town, but it's sort of a climate thing that we manage. We actually have a blog on the website where we continually try to provide interesting content. And of course, you guys are all welcome to see that if you want to. I love adding to my readers. But one of the things we're doing on that right now is we're trying to answer the comments that are coming in on the CAP. We're answering on the blog. And using that to not only communicate with the people of our town, but also hopefully remind others to continue to stay engaged. And we have set engagement with the town as a big part of our work plan and our goals. Now, it's much easier said than done. It can be a difficult thing. When it came to the CAP, we actually did a lot of work on outreach, some of which may or may not be useful to you all. We ran a survey for several months of all town residents. We got a couple hundred responses, which were very helpful actually in helping us think about what our people need and want, and have helped tune some of our efforts a bit. We hosted a series of monthly community meetings where we went through each section of the CAP with any resident who would show up. They were Zoom meetings, so they were not as good as being together, but they did happen. We've also had a comment period for about 6 weeks, and that's been very useful. We're actually just finishing tomorrow. We also talk about it at the town council meeting, almost every meeting. And we have a fair number of people who tune in and watch, and so we do that. And we publish a column once every week in the town newsletter. And one of the things that we had just started doing, the virus shut us down, but we'll resume, is tabling at the farmers market. We're going to start doing outreach to community groups and just helping people understand really the seriousness of the crisis that we face and the urgency of it, and help connect people to ways that they can in fact do something. I don't know, I read sometimes about the psychiatrists who are now having to deal with people who have eco-anxiety, and certainly in the young people today, that's a very real thing. And giving people a channel to do something and make a difference is certainly important. So anyway, maybe that's all I have to say, except I'll just repeat that we are in this with you. We'd like to learn from you and from your experience, and we'd like to offer you our partnership in any way that's ever useful. So thank you again, and thank you, Christine. And I'm finished.
Right. Just want to let folks know we're getting some really good comments in the questions sections about we'd like to see a committee, some information about tidal salt marshes sequestering carbon versus forests. I'm going to all of these. You'll see that they may be dismissed on Zoom as questions, but we'll treat them as comments. So I'm certainly not dismissing anyone who's typing stuff in. But if it's not a question, I'm putting it in that folder for staff to look at later. Just want to let folks know. We have a question about e-bikes, and the e-bike program was SMART. Bolt e-bikes are coming to Larkspur SMART by the end of the year. Are there plans to add more charging stands downtown, Bon Air, Trader Joe's, etc.?
I don't know about specific plans for charging stations in Larkspur, but I do know that that program is coming. They're going to be providing the e-bikes. Well, they're going to be at the smart stations. And so the idea is that this is kind of a last mile program to get people to where they need to go while using the smart train. So I think it's going to be a great program. And but I don't know what the plans are for charging those bikes if they need to. I think there's going to be a docking stations, and that the idea that there'll be stations and that they'll be charging, but I'm just not familiar with the program.
I'm not the lead on this project. One of our senior engineers is, so I've been in on a couple of calls with staff from the Transportation Authority of Marin, as well as our staff around this. And I do know that recently, this was literally a couple of weeks ago, there were discussions about charging stations, and there were talks about downtown Bon Air area, and also, you know, who owns what land, what's in the public right of way, if it's private property, as well as the ability to charge there. So those, I think that's still very much in process, but it's being discussed. That's all. I can't speak any more than that to that. And then
Yeah, and I know in our my discussion with Tam and the other directors on the topic, one of our takeaways or messages to them was the importance of reaching out, particularly to the commercial community, like the major centers. So the bike share is really coordinated with the places and locations that it's going to serve. It's not going to work if there's not you can't just have the bike at the smart station. You need to be able to charge it at the places you're going. So that's that. Their intent was included outreach to the business community.
Yep. Great. I'm going to call on Tom, who has his hand raised. The allow to talk feature is now enabled. So whenever you're ready, can I answer your question or provide any comments or thoughts?
All right, thank you. I just want to echo what was said earlier about resilient neighborhoods. I'm one of those households in Larkspur that participated in that program. And actually, one of the things that's been going on is kind of a lot more collaboration between resilient neighborhoods and other organizations. And one of those organizations that is greenchange.net, and a couple of the principals or key people in that organization have been very active with Mill Valley's climate action plan. And there's a lot of good information on greenchange.net. In fact, we've had resilient neighborhoods and Marin County and MCE regularly at our meetups. And there's kind of a different emphasis on more wide web presence. So, it's a little different format from resilient neighborhoods, where you go through a program of a number of weeks. There's a lot of information that's available to just anybody, so they can start at ground zero. And, but at the same time, we're linking, linking them with resources, like we're pointing them to resilient neighborhoods all the time, as well as county programs. And, consequently, the last couple events that I've been to, Marin County was actually recommending Green Change as a source, along with resilient neighborhoods. So just wanted you to be aware of that. And in terms of community engagement in particular, in terms of reaching out to folks that maybe haven't been too involved, there's a lot of simple things that you can find out about to get started, and then expand from there and grow with all these other organizations, including the great work, for example, that's being done in Fairfax. So collaboration, I think, is going to make it easier for all of us.
We have a couple of additional e-bike questions. So one is that the smart or TAM did a Bolt presentation at the Novato City Council last night, anytime soon for us. I believe that we are on the list as that roadshow goes about with the rollout of that plan, but we don't have a scheduled date yet, but they're in contact with our staff in Public Works who are lead on the project. It's my understanding. And then we have another question about e-bikes. To add on to e-bikes, what about e-bike integration in the transit system? To my limited knowledge, you can't take e-bikes on public transit and there's a lack of secure lockable places for them.
Yeah, those are both big issues with e-bikes. And I don't, so we are aware of those. TAM just did a study on electric bicycles, and so those were a couple of the barriers that they had pointed out in the study. Clearly, we need more secure biking parking for e-bikes, and the transit piece. The bikes are really heavy, and so I'm not sure, what the answer there is. Presumably, maybe the bikes will get lighter over time. So that would be one way of solving that. But I do know that that is an issue that's been raised, and presumably the transit agencies and TAM are trying to figure out a solution to that.
So I take, again, not to interject, I actually ride an e-bike, and I take both. I take Smart when it's not COVID and when I'm not working remotely, and I've taken the bus on occasion as well. Limited space for all bikes is certainly, folks love to take their bikes on Smart. Just practice-wise, if there's anyone interested in taking an e-bike on Smart, they could certainly be with all the other bikes as spaces available. What a lot of folks do is you disconnect the battery and just put it next to you or put it overhead. And the staff, at least that I've dealt with at Smart, usually encourage that for the heaviness to pull up your bike or not. You just unlock it on the models where there's a key to unlock to recharge it. And that's how it's being dealt with, at least as of 2019. I haven't been on Smart in a while, but all right. And there's certainly other transit systems too, ferry, et cetera. I don't want to pretend that Smart and the bus system are the only two transit options for folks. Another question, are there measured climate effects from production, use of single use and other types of plastic from GHGs caused by its production? Should there be stricter plastic recycling and or bans on certain types of plastics in the CAP plan, since plastic is produced from fossil fuels?
Yeah, that's a really good point. There is a program in the plan to reduce what we're calling inorganic trash. And but as far as the climate action plan is really reducing emissions from the sources that we're counting. And so we don't count in the inventories emissions that are produced from, anything that's manufactured outside of Larkspur. Not to say that they're not important, but we're not counting them. So that is an issue. But obviously all consumption, we need to reduce all consumption in order if we're going to reduce worldwide emissions. Neil, you want to say something?
And I would say that the city of Larkspur several years ago, we did adopt a ban of single-use plastic bags. And there is, I know Marin County is leading with the waste management, is leading a discussion and has prepared a sort of a model ordinance potentially for eliminating or reducing carry-out containers and food containers. And that was moving along towards a sort of a collaborative approach to begin rolling out, but has been held up with the onset of COVID and some of the challenges for the local business community, particularly restaurants and so on. But I do think you'll see that, and we can look at our language and see where we can go towards as part of waste is really reducing and single-use plastic materials, not just the bags. So that's a valid point.
All right, we have a few more open questions here for folks that, do you want me to go ahead and ask these as we continue?
Sure.
Okay, great. So a couple of these questions, I'll ask them back to back because they specifically address, although different parts of the CAP. We've touched on it, but I don't think we've specifically addressed it. The possibility to accelerate some of this beyond the parameters of the plan that is currently kind of our timeline now. So one question is, what is the feasibility to implement a REACH code for new construction sooner? Perhaps with exemptions for nonprofit and affordable housing providers. And then there's another question addressing a different part of the plan that says, if the statewide goal changes before the 10 years are up, will the CAP be updated earlier than 10 years to align with any changes in state ambitions or state mandates?
Yes, so that second question, absolutely, that would be the time to, certainly a trigger point for updating the climate action plan if the state increases moves the target, and we have a new target for 2030 or sooner, or a more aggressive target for 2030. That would be a time to update the cap. As far as the other question, adopting an ordinance for sooner is always a possibility. We're talking about doing, especially like an ordinance that is going to require like all electric buildings. We'd like to do something that we can do county-wide. So it is a process to try to get all of the cities and towns on board. And then it also just takes some time to kind of draft the ordinance and provide pathways for exemptions when they're necessary, like for affordable housing. I think that would all be kind of worked out when the ordinance is drafted. So, but that's, we did pick 2023 for the ordinance to be implemented. It would have to be actually adopted next year. And so that's, for government, that's actually kind of probably a feasible timeline to get an ordinance drafted, to get it all of the cities and towns on board and to implement it. But of course, if there was momentum to do it sooner, we would do it sooner.
And I do think, kind of on your point there, Christine, if the momentum to do it, as we've said, we've kind of modeled this through work that's been done by the county and what they're adopting. We try to work collaboratively with the county and the other agencies so that we're adopting ordinances that are fairly consistent and enforceable, and works with and informed by, or informing the building, the construction community, and working with them rather than sort of rolling it out or just throwing it out there, something that's done collaboratively. So we're certainly willing, I think that City of Larkspur will certainly go along with any further momentum to adopt these things sooner, but it's always desirable to do it in a consistent fashion with the other agencies.
All right, and then we have a follow-up question that kind of talks on both the accelerated timeline as well as kind of dives deeper into the question around particularly nonprofit affordable housing. So there are some reports out, particularly, I guess, the Greenlining Institute, about the barriers of nonprofit affordable housing developers to decarbonize buildings, both new and existing.
Sorry, Shannon, you're cutting out.
I just lost her. Oh yeah, okay, it's not just me. Shannon, we can't hear you.
Organizations to ensure that there's equity in these climate policies.
Okay, I got the beginning and the end of that comment.
Sorry, I've also, I'm increasingly caffeinated through this meeting, so perhaps I'm talking.
No, it's not that you're talking too fast. It's just that you cut out, so we didn't
I'm
hear
sorry.
you.
Okay. So this is a question following up on the nonprofit developer question, going in a little bit more depth. So there's some reports out that check out the Greenlining Institute is a resource that this question draws attention to about barriers of nonprofit affordable housing developers to decarbonize buildings, both new and existing, and that there's a need for technical assistance, education and training, and continuous funding stream for the nonprofit developers to achieve both affordable units and decarbonization. We're in a housing crisis that intersects with the climate crisis. So how does this plan anticipate working with local organizations to ensure equity in the policies?
Yeah, that's a really big issue. And it's also a big issue at the state level right now, as they're looking to, adopt a new code, a new building code for the next cycle. And so I know that there has been kind of, different tensions between the environmentalists and the environmental community and advocates that want to have stronger policies, both around EV charging as well as electric buildings, and then the nonprofit, the affordable housing community as well. So, I know the state's trying to figure out how to thread that needle. Affordable housing developers, when they can request relief from certain burdensome requirements in the code. So that is one avenue that's available to them. But I think, hopefully when you're building, if you're building a completely electric building, you don't have to put in natural gas. So there is some savings there. But I think all of this really requires a lot more study, which is why the plan talks about considering an ordinance. We're not writing the ordinance in the plan, and there's all of those other considerations that need to be studied and researched, and then appropriately identified and dealt with in the ordinance.
Right. Next question is, someone asks, my 35 home homeowners association wants to install electric vehicle chargers in our parking lot, which we lease from the school district. Are there incentives and assistance from Larkspur now that can help us?
I would suggest looking at MCE. I don't know if they have the program up right now, but they are looking at multifamily EV chargers and some kind of incentives in a program for that. There is also a state website, and I hope maybe we can get this information, but there's I just don't know, we can't recall the exact name of it because there's so many websites out there, but it does try to aggregate all of the incentives that are out there. And so that might be another source for this.
And I think from the city's standpoint, we have adopted an EV charging ordinance, which is really a streamlined process for permits. So it's a minimum of cost, it's a minimum of submittal information. It's pretty much like a checklist kind of approach. And I am aware of the question on the issue at hand, or the concept at hand for that particular site. So if you have some specific questions on it, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I can certainly get back to you on that process, but it's not, there's no significant planning oversight or hearing process or anything like that. It's a very streamlined electrical permit from the city process.
Okay. And then the name on the Zoom is Robin, but I believe your name's David. If I'm misremembering, please forgive me. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you can chime in when you're ready.
Yes, it is David.
All right, good.
Thanks so much. Hey, I want to drill in just a little bit more on this issue about doing an all-electric ordinance for new buildings in conjunction with the 2022 building codes update, which would be effective January 1st, 2023, and for residential buildings, maybe a year later than that. So I have heard a couple of questions about that time frame. And I would also point out that at least to me, the March 2021 draft could state those goals much more clearly. Christine, in your slides at the beginning of the presentation tonight, it was stated much more explicitly than it's stated in the draft. I think it would be good to update the draft. But I just want to bring up a thought about that. I certainly hear the value in having all the Marin jurisdictions kind of update at the same time and have consistent building code requirements. But that was the goal back there in 2018 and 19 when the county developed and adopted its green building code requirement, making electric preferred the standards for new construction. And due to circumstances that no one anticipated, only 2 other jurisdictions adopted that. And I think we're in a climate emergency, and it may be time for jurisdictions who have the opportunity to lead the way rather than wait till the county updates theirs and go along with that, because that may or may not ever happen. I would point out that right now, so if we were talking about an all-electric ordinance became effective January 1st, 23, so that would apply only to new residential buildings that would be applied for after that date in the permit process. And there's typically a year or even 2 years delay between the date of a permit application and the date some construction actually starts. So if we were to not adopt an all-electric ordinance for new buildings until January 1st, 2023, it really means probably 4 more years of potential new construction without that requirement in place. And I just don't know that we have 4 more years to not take action on that specific issue, particularly in the context of the regional housing needs allocation. There's nothing to prevent someone coming in and making a major residential proposal of perhaps hundreds of residences between now and January 21st or January 1st, 2023. So I would really urge Larkspur to consider. There are plenty of jurisdictions in the Bay Area that have adopted all electric ordinances. There's some great models out there. And I think this may be a time for local jurisdictions. I know Fairfax is working on this now. I think others are starting to nibble on it. And it may be time for Larkspur to step out and take a lead on this rather than move in sync with everyone else. Because I'm very concerned that we just don't have the time, and there could be potentially hundreds of additional residences applied for in that timeframe.
I would just make one comment about the housing element numbers that you're talking about. The housing element actually has to be adopted by January of 2023. So there wouldn't be housing that was developed under the new RENA numbers until,
Okay.
and if there's rezoning that the city is going to do, I'm not sure where their sites are, but if there was rezoning that would happen it would actually coincide with this building code cycle as well. And then as far as, I don't know, Neil would have to talk to like the timing of how long it takes to, when you pull your building permit and how long it actually takes to build the building.
Right.
Yeah, well, and I think that the comments are well taken, and I understand the concern with the potential of potentially hundreds of units coming online. We don't have a proposal in front of us at this time, but those can come. And I think, as Christine said, part of it is syncing timing with the update to the housing element, and those RENA numbers certainly is prudent at that point. And the plan is to do that update with the building code. So I'm not sure if I understand whether you're concerned it's not going to happen or it just isn't happening soon enough. I do understand your concern it's not happening soon enough, but certainly the way the cap is framed is for us to move forward with adopting that ordinance as part of the code update. And at the same time, it may be looking at what have other cities adopted and what's really working well in terms of where there may be exemptions or where there's not exemptions as well. Those are, again, we haven't really noodled out the exact ordinance, but again, that's a question we can take to the city council is, do you want to move forward with this right away?
All right, so we're closing in on 8 p.m. I have 3 questions left in the chat feature. One is very specific that I think might have a pretty targeted answer. The other 2 I think will be really nice to close out on in terms of both things to think about in the CAP as well as if there are some resources available. There are any additional questions or feedback, this is a continuing process. So if there are any follow-up questions or if you talk to any folks who didn't attend the meeting, please feel free to reach out to staff on this climate action plan and specifics on the plan with any feedback, particularly Neil. His information is there, ntoft@cityoflarkspur.org. His phone is there, et cetera, so that we continue to be a resource. But I'll go ahead and I'll ask these questions, and then I think we'll go ahead and close out the meeting if that makes sense to folks. One question is, current efforts by PG&E and other investor-owned utilities, both in the CPUC and in the legislature, particularly AB 1139, to drastically reduce or end net energy metering incentives for rooftop solar could radically change solar adoption. Is the basis for projection of rooftop solar adoption and decrease in emissions in Larkspur for the CAP based on current incentives? So to paraphrase that is, certain things may change in net metering incentives and how attractive it is if you're using the economic case to adopt solar. And do we use that as really the backbone of our basis for rooftop solar adoption and therefore, decrease in emissions in Larkspur in the CAP?
Yeah, it's not based on the current incentives. What we're basing it on is just the growth rate of solar and the traditional growth rate and kind of projecting going forward. It's really hard to know exactly what incentives are going to be available. The price of solar, that's also a factor that will influence whether people install solar or not. I will say that whether people install solar or because the electricity is just getting really clean anyway, because it's going to be renewable, it doesn't have a big impact on the overall emissions, whether the solar is being generated on your rooftop or if you're just getting it through your electricity provider. So.
Great. Okay. And then we have 2 additional questions. One asks, how does the CAP factor in COVID relief of not only residences, but also small businesses, potentially? And then also a distinct but related question about how the CAP is creating space for decarbonization in the workforce and labor to be local workforce and living in the area, and how can we collaborate with higher education like the College of Marin, SJCC, vocational schools, et cetera, to build that workforce locally?
As far as COVID relief, the plan isn't really addressing COVID. I think that we'll definitely have some impacts, and we don't really know what those are going to be at this point. For example, people are working from home, and the transportation consultants I've talked to are actually saying that, a lot of those jobs people are going to continue to work from home. So we should have some, and that would be actually wonderful to see, because that would really reduce our transportation, our VMT numbers, but they haven't been incorporated at this point into long-term projections. And so we'll have to see how that kind of plays out. And other, I think the comment was about COVID relief, but that's just, it's kind of a short-term impact, and the plan is really looking out over the next 10 years. So it's not really specifically addressing COVID.
And I think one of the issues about the marrying workforce with the job locations and the schools, like the city, this goes across not just the cap, but it goes towards our general plan and what will be the housing element. But a lot of practices, even right now under current housing element and general plan, where the city's in position of working towards housing, providing more housing stock, more mixed use housing within commercial areas. We recently granted a tax exempt status for the purchase of the large residential property, rental property that is through California Housing Authority program, is providing for moderate income housing targeted towards teachers and workforce within Larkspur. And we're looking at other opportunities to do that. So a lot of that is really addressed for our land use and our housing element policies to create more affordable housing in areas near transit, near the main arterials of Magnolia and Sir Francis Drake. Of course, that's always a challenging balance with the issues of traffic and congestion that those areas face. So again, it's also adding on policies that really encourage bicycle facilities, access to local commercial services to reduce use of vehicles. So it's an issue that sort of crosses between a number of different policy documents within the city.
Yeah, and just to circle back to the COVID relief question, for folks in the community who are interested in how the city may be spending or allocating any resources, federal, state, regional monies that may come from COVID relief, there's a standing item at all of our city council meetings that's a COVID and financial update. So the city manager gives a report to the community and the city council about how any of these funds would be spent, and also how the city is going about COVID relief as these monies begin to be distributed. The majority of these funds haven't been distributed or haven't been distributed at all to the city as of yet. So for folks who are more interested in that or would like to follow up and follow along with as to how that develops, that would be one of the places to do so. So is there any other comments, Neil, Christine, that you'd like to have before we end this meeting? Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening.
Yeah, I think my last comment is if there's something we really haven't answered or you want to learn more, feel free to contact me. If I need, I can certainly get hold of Christine and find out more for you. I'm available at ntoft, N-T-O-F-T, at cityoflarkspur.org. Or you can also get my phone number. I'm quite available on the website as the planning and building director.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the meeting for everybody, close the webinar. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Sometime next week, early next week, this will be uploaded on our website and to our YouTube channel for anyone who's interested in viewing this or sharing with anyone. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you for attending. Thank you.